Welcome, my Bio 120 students. I wanted to make this little video for you this week because you have a lot due and the chapters are really intense, 6, 7, and 8. The material is a bit difficult, and so I thought I would make this video for you to help you understand the processes in the chapters a little bit more, a little bit easier, and with a little bit less detail. So I think it's going to help you a lot if you watch it. I want to review a few things about the week before we get started. First of all, last week we went over classification, which is extremely important because it helps us know information about species and groups of species that we wouldn't ordinarily know if we didn't classify. We as human beings do this naturally in our everyday lives. We know what chairs do. We know how they behave. We know one when we see one, even though we've never come across this particular chair before. So classification is terribly important. We do it as humans, and we also do it as scientists. You also learned about cells, so bacterial cells and eukaryotic cells, and how the differences between them help us exploit that difference. For example, in the use of antibiotics. So antibiotics are chemicals that kill living beings. Why, when we take them, don't they kill us? Because these chemicals that kill target structures in bacterial cells that either we don't have or our structures are different. So that's the importance of antibiotics and how they actually work. Antibiotic resistance was another really important topic because it is one of the top 10 health issues in the world today. We are running out of effective antibiotics, and that's because we use them too much and we don't use them properly. There are lots of reasons for this, but we are struggling right now to keep up with the evolution of bacteria and the changes that they produce in order to respond to us trying to kill them with antibiotics. So last week was a good week. You learned all about different cell structures, endoplasmic reticulum in eukaryotes, plasmids in bacteria, etc. This week you have 3 chapters, 6, 7, and 8. Remember to use your OpenStax textbook. It is a free textbook. You can read it online. So please use it as a resource. I'm helping you with the video to go through that information and help you understand why it's important, but still read your chapters. Also read the Module 4 overview and the videos, this video as well as the one about carbon dioxide that you have this week. The discussion board postings, well, realize that you have 3 things to do this week. The discussion board postings, a journal entry, and also milestone 2. So that's why it's such an important week. In the discussion board postings, you will discuss whether photosynthesis and cellular respiration are opposite processes or reactions, complementary, or both. So the answer is not going to be a simple one. You know that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have anything to discuss. When you look at the processes just as chemical equations, they look like they are opposite, but I'm telling you now that they are both. So you're going to have to figure out why they are both. You're also going to talk about how plants remove CO2 from the atmosphere and what's going to happen if we continue to put excessive amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere. Your journal entry is discussing aerobic versus anaerobic respiration processes and why we might think that glycolysis is the most energy production process or chemical reaction that there is on Earth. This video will help with that. You will also write about ethanol being produced as a biofuel. And then you have milestone 2. There's more information in the written announcement. And if you'll look at it, I put in bold hints for each one of those 5 steps in milestone 2. So please do look at that. And as always, if you have any questions, please email me. I'm constantly checking my email. I will be glad to answer any questions. We can work through problems, issues that you have. I am here to help you, so please let me help you. You have a lot to do this week. So let's continue on with the video and the material for this week. All right. The overview this week is, well, you've learned about chemical reactions and you've learned about life. Well, what's the connection here? Life requires chemical reactions that occur in cells in order to produce energy molecules and also the building blocks of the macromolecules that are needed for life. Excuse me. The sum total of all the chemical reactions in organisms is called metabolism. You don't normally in your everyday life use this term in the same way. Metabolism refers to all the chemical processes that happen in cells. So this includes catabolic reactions where food is broken down and anabolic reactions where macromolecules are produced. The catabolic reactions produce energy molecules, and the most important energy molecule that cells make is ATP. Here's a picture of ATP, and you will notice that there are 3 phosphorus atoms that are bound to this backbone of adenosine triphosphate. The phosphorus has oxygen surrounding it, and those oxygens plus the phosphorus make up something called a phosphate group. Now, the phosphate groups are held on to this molecule by high energy bonds, and if that bond is broken, that high amount of energy is released, and that energy can be used to do work. That's what's so important about ATP. It stores up a lot of energy that can be released and used to do work. How do these chemical reactions occur? By way of enzymes. This is a representation of an enzyme called amylase. So enzymes are normally proteins that do work. They have specific jobs. So the example of the amylase that I just showed you is an enzyme that breaks down starch into sugars, and that is literally its only job. There are thousands of enzymes per cell. They change all the time depending on what processes the cell is going through. Is it reproducing? Is it doing its work? Is it hibernating? Is it using a new food source? So the number and the types of enzymes is constantly changing in a cell. These enzymes do work. They run chemical reactions, and that's why they're so important. And another thing that is extremely important is that the code for making all these enzymes that cells need are found, that code is found in the DNA. This is why DNA is so important. This is why genetics is so important, because genetics determines the chemical reactions that are going to happen in your DNA, in your cell, or in all of your cells if you're a eukaryote. Okay, now we're moving on to aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is a set of chemical reactions that require oxygen, where glucose is broken down to produce ATP. We talked about why ATP is important. Glucose is a food source. It is literally the most universal food source on the planet. It's a sugar. It's a simple sugar, and you can break it down to produce lots and lots of ATP if you use oxygen in this process. That's why it's called aerobic, because aerobic means with oxygen. Where does this happen? It happens in the mitochondria of eukaryotic cells and the plasma membrane of bacteria. It begins with a set of chemical reactions that we call glycolysis. Oh, you heard of that. Remember that journal entry, I think it was, that you have to do this week. Glycolysis. If you look at the word, glycolysis means glyco, sugar, lysis, to break. Glycolysis, to break glucose. So in glycolysis, glucose is broken in half, and a small amount of ATP is produced in that process. So in aerobic respiration, part of it is glycolysis. I told you aerobic respiration is a series of chemical reactions. The first part of this is called glycolysis. You may have heard of the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis, and if you have, I just want to explain to you the importance of this. You make different energy molecules through aerobic respiration, not just ATPs. But the problem is that enzymes can only use the energy furnished by ATP. So the last part of aerobic respiration, called the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis, is converting energy in these other molecules to more ATP molecules. All right, so that was aerobic respiration. What about the anaerobic processes? These are called fermentation and anaerobic respiration. Oh, look, they also begin with glycolysis. So these are the three main ways that you produce energy from food: aerobic respiration, fermentation, anaerobic respiration. They all start with glucose. Now, why would we think that it is the most primitive and ancient of the energy-producing chemical pathways? Because all of the ones that we have now begin with glycolysis. These also convert the energy in glucose, which is that universal sugar, into ATP molecules. They do this without oxygen. So you remember when you did that factor X thing? Yeah. Factor X is probably not oxygen, because there are plenty of organisms that can do fermentation their whole lifespan and never see an oxygen molecule or anaerobic respiration. These organisms that do these two processes have slower growth, but they can live in oxygen-poor environments, whereas we couldn't. These tend to be extremely small organisms, so bacteria and some of the protists can do this. And you don't make the normal waste products that you do with aerobic respiration. You don't make water and CO2. You make other waste products. And some of them are horrible and nasty, but just think about it. I bet you come in contact with some fermentation processes. The bubbles that yeast make help. You make bread, the alcohol, the yeast go through fermentation to produce using sugar from grapes. You may have had some contact with that. Okay, then we have photosynthesis. So this is the last chapter in your series here. I give you a picture of a nice big oak tree here doing lots and lots of photosynthesis. And how do you know that? Because it's nice and green. Okay, the green is a clue here. What is the purpose of photosynthesis? The purpose of photosynthesis is for whatever organism that does this, because there are all different kinds, not just plants, to produce food in the form of what? Glucose, that universal food source, using light energy, energy from the sun. All right, so I'm going to give you a simple little equation here to help you understand how this works. You'll start out with sunlight. Yep, there's the sun. And pigments. Pigments like chlorophyll A and B. There are also what are called the accessory pigments that are yellow or orange colored. So these pigments are extremely important in harvesting the energy from sunlight. So this is what happens in photosynthesis. This energy is harvested or gathered up by these pigments, and ATP is produced. Oh, we've heard of ATP. Now I just put a little graphic here of a fire. I'm not sure why I use that to represent ATP. But anyway, you know what ATP is. It's an energy-rich molecule that helps enzymes do their work. All right? So the sunlight is used to make ATP. Okay, we haven't made glucose yet. Here's the next step. So that ATP is used to link together a whole bunch of CO2 molecules, carbon dioxide, to make glucose. There it is. So plants and other photosynthesizers take that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, out of the air, and use the energy from those ATPs made from sunlight to produce food, glucose. So glucose is the end product that this organism wants because that's its food. It produces its own food. And that's why photosynthesizers are called producers, because they produce their own food. A byproduct of photosynthesis is the production of oxygen gas, which of course we need. Almost all the eukaryotes require oxygen to do what? Aerobic respiration. See? All of this is connected. So that is photosynthesis. That's a basic equation and what happens. And there are lots and lots of steps to this, and they go through that in chapter 8 in your textbook. But I need you to break this down so that you understand the basics of it and you understand the importance of it. Okay, that is the end. And let me know if you're having any trouble, you're having any problems whatsoever. I will be glad to help you.